Have you ever reached a point where both love and English felt equally exhausting? Where one quiet week made you question your marriage, your motivation, and even why you keep trying to learn this language at all? In this video, I share a deeply personal story from my past week in the United States about friendship turning into love, small conflicts inside a marriage, and how slow, imperfect English conversations unexpectedly helped heal both my relationship and my confidence. If you're tired, stuck, or close to giving up, this story is for you. A tired question at dawn. Have you ever woken up before the alarm, stared at the ceiling, and felt strangely defeated before the day even started? That was me last Monday morning in the United States. The house was quiet. My partner was still asleep. Outside, the sky was pale gray, undecided about becoming morning. And inside my head, one tired question kept looping slow and heavy. Is this really working? Not just my marriage. Not just my life here. Even my English. Everything felt worn, you know this feeling. Your brain hasn't failed, but it's clearly protesting. Psychologists call this cognitive fatigue, when the mind runs out of emotional fuel, not intelligence. You don't suddenly become bad at English. Your brain simply decides the effort is no longer worth the reward. It's the same mechanism that makes long-term couples argue about nothing. A cup left on the table. A message answered too late. Small things feel enormous when motivation drops. That morning I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee I didn't really taste. I tried to read a short English article, just 5 minutes, I told myself. But every sentence felt heavier than it should. Not difficult. Just annoying. My inner voice whispered, "What's the point? You've been learning for years." That voice is dangerous, not because it's loud, but because it sounds reasonable. Neuroscience has an uncomfortable truth about moments like this. The brain prefers certainty over growth. Familiar frustration feels safer than uncertain improvement. Staying stuck requires less energy than changing. So when you feel like quitting English or questioning love or marriage, it's rarely because you can't continue. It's because continuing asks for presence. And presence costs energy. Here's the strange part. That same week, my relationship was going through something similar. Nothing dramatic. No shouting. No betrayal. Just distance. Two people tired in parallel, assuming the other one should somehow fix it. We spoke less. When we did talk, our words were efficient, practical, emotionally empty. Like bad textbook English. Correct. Lifeless. And that's when it hit me. Language learning and love fail in the same quiet way. Not with explosions, but with silence. You stop listening deeply. You stop being curious. You start translating everything into effort instead of meaning. So I asked myself a different question at that kitchen table. Not why am I so bad at this? But what if I slowed down enough to stay? Just stay with the sentence. Stay with the feeling. Stay with the person sleeping in the next room. That question didn't solve anything instantly, but it changed the direction of the day. And sometimes that's enough. Because quitting is fast. Staying is slow. And slow, whether in love or English, is where things quietly begin again. Friendship before romance. Before love becomes dramatic, before marriage turns serious, it usually starts in a much quieter place, friendship. Not the movie kind. The awkward, ordinary kind. The kind where nothing impressive happens, and that's exactly why it works. That's how my relationship began. Long before this recent week in the US reminded me why that foundation matters more than passion ever could. Think about how you learn English when you're relaxed. Not preparing for a test. Not proving anything. just listening, just understanding enough to stay in the conversation. Friendship works the same way. There is no pressure to perform, no need to impress. Psychologists call this low-stakes interaction. Your nervous system stays calm, which allows learning, emotional or linguistic, to actually happen. This past week, my partner and I accidentally returned to that place. Not intentionally. We were simply too tired to argue properly. One evening after a long day, we sat on the couch half watching something on TV. I made a small comment in English. Slow. Simple. Not polished. She replied the same way. Short sentences. Gentle tone. No hidden meaning. And suddenly the room felt safer. Your brain loves safety. When it feels safe, it releases dopamine in small, steady amounts, the same chemical that helps you remember words and associate them with positive emotion. That's why you remember English phrases you learned during a good conversation, but forget the ones you memorized under pressure. Love and language follow the same rule. Safety first, depth later. Friendship is where mistakes are allowed. In friendship, mispronounced words become jokes, not failures. In marriage, forgotten gestures can still be forgiven if friendship is alive. That night, we laughed about something trivial. Not a big laugh. Just enough. And I noticed how my English sounded more natural when I wasn't trying to sound natural. Here's a practical lesson you can steal from this. When practicing English, treat the language like a friend, not a goal. Speak to it casually. Let sentences be incomplete. Let silence exist. The brain processes language better when it doesn't feel chased. Many people believe love needs intensity to survive. The science says otherwise. Long-term relationships stay strong through emotional attunement, small, consistent signals of understanding. The same applies to English. 10 calm minutes every day beats 1 exhausting hour once a week. By the end of that evening, nothing in our life had changed externally, but internally something softened. We remembered how to sit next to each other without fixing anything. Friendship didn't solve the problem. It reminded us why solving it was worth the effort. And maybe that's the real beginning, not romance, not fluency, but the moment you stop trying to win and start staying present. 1 week of small conflicts. People imagine relationship problems as loud arguments and dramatic exits. Real trouble is quieter. It arrives as a week full of small conflicts, so small you feel silly mentioning them, yet heavy enough to drain you. That was this past week for us in the US. Nothing broke. No one yelled. But tension lived in the pauses between sentences. On Tuesday, we disagreed about something trivial. The kind of thing you forget 5 minutes later, except your body doesn't. Should we visit family this weekend or stay home? The words were polite. The tone was controlled. But underneath there was resistance. When language learners say, "I understand but I don't feel confident speaking," it's the same phenomenon. Surface clarity. Internal friction. Psychology explains this through microstress accumulation. 1 unresolved moment doesn't hurt much. 10 of them quietly convince your brain that effort equals danger. So you withdraw. You speak less. You listen defensively. In relationships, this creates distance. In English learning, it creates avoidance. By Wednesday, our conversations became efficient. Logistics only. Who's doing what? When? No curiosity. No softness. My English practice followed the same pattern. I consumed content. I didn't engage with it. Listening without responding is safe. Speaking like emotional honesty feels risky. There's a cognitive bias at work here. Negativity weighting. Your brain gives more importance to small negative signals than positive ones. One awkward conversation in English outweighs 5 successful ones. One uncomfortable moment at home colors the whole week. This bias evolved to protect us, but in modern life it often just keeps us stuck. Thursday evening I noticed something telling. I wanted to say something kind, something personal. In English. The sentence formed in my head slowly, imperfectly. And I stopped myself. Not because I couldn't say it, but because I was afraid it wouldn't land right. That hesitation is the exact place most English learners quit. Not at ignorance, but at vulnerability. Language and love both ask for the same courage, to risk being slightly misunderstood. When you avoid that risk, everything becomes technically correct and emotionally empty. Here's a simple practice I learned the hard way that week. When tension is low but present, don't escalate. Clarify. In English, this means repeating slowly, using simpler words, checking understanding. In relationships, it means asking, "Did you mean it this way?" Instead of assuming. On Friday night, we finally spoke about the week, not dramatically, just honestly. Short sentences. Long pauses. No winning. And something surprising happened. The tension didn't disappear, but it stopped growing. That's how progress actually looks, less damage, not instant peace. Most people quit English because they expect motivation to return before they act. Most relationships fail for the same reason. But action, small imperfect action, is what creates motivation. Not the other way around. A week of small conflicts doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're human. The mistake is letting silence do the talking for you. When words fail at home, there's a special kind of frustration when you know what you feel, but the words refuse to cooperate. Not disappear, just stand there slightly wrong. That happened to me this week at home in the US. And it felt uncomfortably similar to every moment you've ever frozen while trying to speak English. It was a simple moment. I wanted to explain why I felt distant. Nothing dramatic. Just honest. But the sentences came out flat. Overly logical. Stripped of warmth. My partner listened, nodded, and said, "I understand." In a way that clearly meant she understood the words, not the feeling. If you've ever been told, "Your grammar is fine, but I don't get your point," you know this pain. Linguists and psychologists agree on something important. Emotion and language are processed in overlapping but different parts of the brain. When emotional load is high, linguistic precision drops. This is not a failure. It's biology. Your brain prioritizes survival over elegance. That's why, under stress, both love and English sound worse. That night, I noticed myself simplifying my English instinctively. Shorter sentences. Slower pace. More pauses. And oddly, that helped not just with clarity but with connection. Research on emotional labeling shows that naming feelings, even imperfectly, reduces their intensity. Saying "I feel tired and disconnected" works better than a perfectly structured paragraph that avoids emotion. Most learners believe fluency means complexity. In real life, fluency means timing and honesty. Children connect deeply with very limited language because their intent is clear. Adults hide behind advanced structures and lose meaning in the process. Here's a concrete technique you can use, stolen directly from that night. When words fail, don't push forward. Go backward. Use fewer words. Speak slower. Allow silence after you speak. Silence is not a mistake. It's processing time for you, and the listener. My partner eventually responded, not with a solution but with presence. She mirrored my pace, matched my tone. The conversation softened, and my English ironically sounded better than it had all week. Not because it was correct, but because it was aligned. There's a reason many couples argue more in a second language. Emotional nuance is harder when vocabulary is limited. But limitation can also create honesty. You can't hide in fancy phrasing. You say what matters or nothing. By the end of that conversation, nothing was resolved on paper. But something shifted. We stopped trying to explain and started trying to understand. That's the real goal of language, whether at home or in public. If English feels like it disappears when you need it most, remember this. Your brain isn't betraying you. It's protecting you. Work with it. Slow down. Speak less. Mean more. Because sometimes when words fail, connection finally has room to speak. Science of comfort and trust. Most people think trust is built by big promises. Neuroscience quietly disagrees. Trust is built through predictability. Small repeated signals that tell the brain, you're safe here. This week in the US, after the tension, after the awkward conversations, that principle became painfully clear in my own home. When conflict lingers, your nervous system stays slightly activated. Not fight or flight panic. Just enough tension to keep you guarded. Scientists call this low-grade stress activation. It drains patience, memory, and motivation. That's why English feels harder when you're emotionally unsettled. The brain doesn't separate language learning from life context. Stress in one area bleeds into all others. After our difficult talk, my partner and I didn't try to fix the relationship. Instead, we changed the environment. Same breakfast time. Same evening walk. Same short check-in at night. Predictable rhythms. Research shows routines reduce cortisol and increase oxytocin, the hormone associated with bonding and trust. The effect is subtle but powerful. Here's the connection to English practice. Motivation doesn't come from inspiration. Comes from safety. When your brain knows what to expect, it stops resisting. That's why 5 minutes of English at the same time every day works better than random bursts of enthusiasm. One evening, during our walk, we spoke in very simple English. Not because we had to, because it felt easier. Familiar phrases. Repeated structures. Today was long. I feel better now. Nothing impressive. But repetition builds neural pathways. The brain loves patterns it can predict. This is supported by implicit learning theory. You acquire language best when you're not consciously trying to memorize, but when you're exposed repeatedly in a low-pressure context. Love works the same way. Grand gestures impress, but consistency convinces. Here's a practical framework you can apply immediately. Choose one safe sentence in English. Use it daily. Same words. Same tone. Attach it to a routine: morning coffee, evening walk, bedtime reflection. Over time, the sentence becomes emotionally anchored. Your brain stops evaluating and starts accepting. By the end of the week, the tension between us hadn't vanished, but it no longer controlled the room. Comfort returned, not as excitement but as quiet trust. The kind that doesn't announce itself. Many people quit English because they wait to feel ready. But readiness is a byproduct of repetition in a safe space. Love doesn't grow because of promises. It grows because tomorrow looks familiar enough to stay. Trust, it turns out, is not dramatic. It's boring in the best possible way. And boring, when done right, is where fluency and intimacy both quietly thrive. Learning English through love. There's a strange moment when learning stops feeling like learning. It happens when your attention shifts away from performance and toward connection. This week, somewhere between routine walks and quiet evenings, English slipped into that space for me. Not as a subject, but as a byproduct of love trying to function. One night, we were preparing dinner together. Nothing romantic. Just chopping vegetables, moving around each other in a small kitchen. I said something simple in English. Not planned. Not practiced. She responded without correcting me, without slowing me down artificially. That mattered more than you think. Studies in second language acquisition show that non-interruptive feedback, being understood without constant correction, dramatically increases speaking confidence. Most learners sabotage themselves by demanding perfection before communication. But the brain doesn't work that way. Fluency emerges from usage, not approval. In relationships, this is obvious. You don't stop expressing yourself because your sentence wasn't perfect. You adjust as you go. English deserves the same grace. That week, I noticed my sentences becoming shorter but more frequent. Instead of saving energy for serious practice, I spent it on small moments. A comment about the weather. A thought about the day. A feeling stated plainly. Psychologically, this is called distributed practice. Small, spaced interactions beat long, exhausting sessions every time. Here's something practical you can steal immediately. Tie English to emotional relevance. Don't practice neutral sentences like, "The book is on the table." Practice sentences that belong to your life. "I feel tired today." "I don't want to argue." "I appreciate this moment." Emotional content activates memory more strongly. The brain remembers what matters. By the end of the week, English had stopped feeling like a test I was failing. It felt like a tool I was using imperfectly but honestly. And honesty is surprisingly persuasive. My partner listened more closely. I spoke more freely. The language improved without being chased. People often ask whether love motivates learning or learning improves love. Neuroscience suggests a loop. Positive emotional states enhance cognitive flexibility. Better communication reduces stress. Reduced stress improves learning. It's not linear. It's circular. That's the quiet secret no one tells you. You don't need confidence to speak English. You need a reason to stay in the conversation. Love, real, daily, slightly messy love, provides that reason better than any textbook ever could. Does love need promises? At some point in every long relationship, the big promises stop doing the heavy lifting. The vows are still there. The words still exist. But daily life doesn't respond to memory, it responds to behavior. This question stayed with me all week in the US. Does love survive because of what we promised, or because of what we do when no one is watching? English learning asks the same uncomfortable question. You probably promised yourself you'd be fluent by now. You made plans, bought courses, saved videos. But promises don't teach your brain. Repetition does. Presence does. Returning after a bad day does. Research on behavioral consistency shows that the brain trusts actions more than intentions. This applies to relationships and to self-belief. Every time you show up for 5 quiet minutes of English, your brain updates its model of who you are. Not a quitter. Not a dreamer. Someone reliable. That week, my partner and I didn't reassure each other with grand statements. We didn't say, "Everything will be okay." We did smaller things. We listened without fixing. We spoke even when tired. We stayed in the room. Those actions rebuilt more trust than any emotional speech could. Here's a reframing that might help you. Don't ask, "Do I still love this?" Ask, "Can I show up for this today?" Love doesn't need eternal certainty. It needs daily participation. English doesn't need motivation. It needs continuity. One evening, I almost skipped speaking English altogether. I felt clumsy, uninspired. Instead, I said one sentence. Just one. That sentence didn't impress anyone, but it reinforced a pattern. And patterns are what the brain believes. There's a cognitive bias called the planning fallacy. We overestimate what future motivation will fix and underestimate what today's small action can prevent. Promises live in the future. Habits live in the present. By the end of the week, the question answered itself quietly. Love doesn't need promises to survive. It needs proof, repeated, boring human proof. English works the same way. Fluency isn't declared. It's accumulated. So if you're waiting to feel ready again, stop waiting. Read one sentence. Say one thought. Stay one more minute. Not because you promised, but because staying changes who you become. Quiet answer, not a miracle. People often expect transformation to feel dramatic. A breakthrough conversation. A sudden wave of motivation. A clear sign that everything will be fine. This past week in the United States gave me none of that. Instead, it offered something far less exciting and far more reliable. Nothing was magically fixed. My marriage didn't turn into a movie scene. My English didn't suddenly become fluent and smooth. What changed was quieter. The tension stopped growing. The silence became less threatening. The effort required to speak, to stay, became manageable. Psychologists call this emotional stabilization. It's the phase where the nervous system returns to baseline, not because problems disappear, but because they stop feeling urgent. This state is essential for learning. The brain cannot absorb new language when it's busy protecting you from imagined danger. Sunday, my partner and I shared a simple moment. Sitting together. Saying very little. A short sentence in English passed between us. It landed. That was enough. Not a miracle. A confirmation. Here's the practical truth this week taught me, and maybe it applies to you. You don't quit because you're incapable. You quit because the cost feels higher than the reward. Lower the cost. Slow the pace. Reduce the pressure. Stay close to what feels human. English learning doesn't need intensity. Love doesn't need certainty. Both need space to breathe. If you're exhausted, you're not broken. You're overloaded. An overload is solved by subtraction, not force. Fewer words. Fewer expectations. Fewer promises to a future version of yourself. This week didn't give me answers shouted in capital letters. It gave me one sentence I can stand behind. If something matters, stay with it gently. And sometimes that's the strongest commitment you can make. If this story felt real to you, save it for another day. Subscribe if you want slow, honest American English through real-life stories.